You're smelly, you're dirty, you're irritating, you're out of date. Richard and Den had not stopped arguing all morning. Den was in the yards helping the workmen to lay down a new siding. Den had unwisely started complaining about being at the steam sheds. Richard felt insulted. "You're not welcome here," snorted Richard. "There's nothing wrong with our sheds, it's you that's the problem." Den was needed elsewhere and sneered away. That evening, Richard told the other engines about Den. "Oh, he's always been like that," explained Fred. "I think it's turned more into an obsession to hate steam engines now." "All diesels can't be like that, can they?" asked Roger. Richard was still fuming. "I just don't understand. He comes in here, grumbles because he's doing us a favour, and for no reason turns his nose up at our shed." Richard's safety valve began to shoot steam in the air. Just then, Arthur rolled in. He didn't seem to be his usual self. Fred was worried and asked if anything was wrong. It's just been a long day, and now I've got the sleeper train to take," sighed Arthur. "But one mustn't grumble." His crew was changed. They checked him over, and with a hoot of the whistle, Arthur crawled out of the sheds. "Now that's commitment to the job," puffed Richard. "I bet Den doesn't know what proper hard work means." But his comment fell on deaf ears as everyone, trying to avoid having a debate, quickly fell asleep. The next day, Den was back at the sheds. This time round he had a small crane to marshal around the yards for the workmen. It had been brought over from the goods yard, and Den had to dart across the main line to get it, as so not to block traffic. He was busy boasting at how up-to-date and modern he was. "More advanced engines get given hard jobs," he announced. Richard let off steam crossly. But to add insult to injury, Fred was out of action. He needed retubing. "Past your sell-by date, old-timer," sniggered Den. "Who do you think you are?" Richard grunted. Before Richard could say anything else, Roger limped into the sheds. "What's happened to you?" asked Richard. Roger seemed a little embarrassed. "I dropped me fire." Den rudely laughed at the situation. "A bit of hard work, you all start falling apart." Richard was furious. He wanted to tell Den all about Arthur and what hard work really was. "Haven't you got any horses to round up?" puffed Fred sweetly. Now it was Den's turn to be embarrassed, and he scurried away. Fred chuckled, but Richard was determined to pay Den out. As Richard backed onto his passenger train, Arthur was ready to depart with Roger's passenger train. He put on a brave face as he steamed away. Richard was in awe over the Royal Scot. "He just never seems to stop," said Richard in admiration. "I hope he gets a rest soon," sighed Jimmy. "He's got to take the sleeper train again tonight." Richard was amazed. He soon told Jimmy all about Den. "If Den did all the work Arthur had to do, then perhaps he wouldn't have any time to be so rude to us," Jimmy puffed. Richard agreed as he left with his train. Late that afternoon, Richard arrived on shed. Arthur was preparing to leave again. "All this running around can't be good for you," said Richard, concerned. "Oh, not to worry," smiled Arthur. "One more journey, and then another engine will take over the train. Then I can have a nice long rest." The engines were glad to hear the news, and Arthur cheerfully left to collect his train. By now, the workmen had finished laying the new siding, and were packing up their tools ready for home. Den was starting to feel a little unwell, but he didn't want to show it in front of the steam engines, and certainly not in front of Richard. With Den working in the goods yard, then sprinting across the main line to help at the sheds, it had all taken its toll on his engine. The driver seemed concerned, but Den was conceited. "I can manage," he growled. The driver scratched his head. "Well, I'll have to look at your engine when we get back to the yards." And with that, Den spluttered away. However, Richard had seen everything. He grinned cheekily. "Better be prepared for rescue duty," he said to himself. A few moments later came the call that Den had broken down on the main line. Immediately Richard took up the call and set off to the rescue. But when he arrived at the scene, Richard was in for a surprise. There was Arthur slowly approaching Den and the works train. "It's all right," called Richard. "I'll do it." "Oh, no trouble at all," replied Arthur. Den said nothing as Arthur, with his train, pushed Den on ahead. When Richard had turned round, he found Den and the works train in a small siding next to the main line. The workmen were looking over his engine. "That won't take too long to fix," said a workman, "but it'll be out of service for a few days." Den was sat sulking. He knew Richard was desperate to gloat and tease him, but surprisingly, Richard resisted the temptation. "Now that is what hard work means," he murmured, and that was all Richard said. When Richard returned home, he told the other engines what had happened. Everyone found the funny side of Den's comeuppance. "It serves him right," chuckled Jimmy. "He'll never learn." His very words. "A bit of hard work and they all start falling apart," teased Roger. "Well done to Arthur, though," puffed Fred. "He truly is an inspiration and an example to us all." Richard smiled proudly. He couldn't have put it better himself.